Welcome to part 3 of our Ventuz Quick Start tutorial. In this part we are really going to create something cool. It will also be a kind of complex. You will learn a lot of techniques, a lot of notes, but this is very essential to get quickly your head around the Ventuz development. So let me start to show you a very important, some very important notes. That's obviously geometries, because everything you want to show, what should be rendered, needs a kind of a geometry, except later on particles or things like that. But I will go mainly through geometries today. Will explain the material node and a simple animation with a mover, and we will explain the concept of the layers in this part. So let's start right away. And first thing, I suggest you, if you're new in Ventuz, open your Toolbox and bring it somewhere, wherever you want. If you have two screens, move it to another screen. But in that case, I will put it down here, at least for now, for the beginning. Later on, I will use the shortcut to create nodes, but let's start here. Okay, if we open our Toolbox, then we can go to geometry, and then we can see all the basic default geometry shapes, what you will get in Ventuz. You are also able to import OBJ files or FBX files. We will do that in a later tutorial. So let's check let's start with a rectangle. So I drag and drop my rectangle geometry into my hierarchy, and immediately we can see here our rectangle. We have here on the left side, for every node we selected, we will get here. First thing, when we select a node in our hierarchy, then he will jump directly into the content editor, and in the content editor I will do logic later. You know, I can make bindings. We will also do our first bindings in this part of this tutorial. So again, if I select a node in my hierarchy, then I have access to all its properties. By default, you will probably have this setup. Yeah? That means your properties, you can change the views of your properties. We have inputs and outputs, and we can show it side by side or above each other. So I like actually this view. I also suggest you at the beginning for these tutorials use this view, because here you have the inputs on top and the outputs on the bottom. Yeah? As you can see here, that rectangle has actually no outputs, but many logical nodes, animations, movers, scripts, they have inputs and outputs, of course. So inputs we basically see as values we can change. The user can change the input values, and based on that input values, the output values will change. Later on, more to that. So a rectangle has, or every node has his very specific input properties, like a size X, a size Y, yeah, here normalize, the alignment. So if I align that rectangle to the left now, then you can see it will change its size, not from the center. Yeah, it will really change its size from left side, left aligned. I can do the same here with bottom or top. So here I can now scale the height or bring the height up from the bottom, right? So this is very important to know, because with this one you can create loading bars or other nice animations. If it's in the center by default, then he scales up yeah, symmetrically to left and right side, or to top and bottom. So these are geometry nodes. So let's use another node. Let's use the cube node, for example. And this cube node, let's bring an axis in front. Here in world we find the axis, and with that axis I scale up my scaling factor of my cube. And that we also, because it looks like a rectangle now, right? Because it's facing straight away to the default camera. So I also rotate it a little bit over the X and Y. And now let's go to the properties of our cube. So of course we have here the size X, the size Y, and the size Z. Let's bring them back to default with that little button. So if it's not default value, then this one will be highlighted. So if you press it, Ventuz will bring it back to the default value. We also have a bevel radius. So remember also what I told you in the last in the part 2 of this quick start tutorial. Sometimes you want to fine adjust their values, like here the bevel radius. Yeah, if I just press my left mouse button, it's very heavy, large values. So here I want to press then Control to make smaller steps, or even Control plus Shift at the same time to make much smaller steps, right? And with this one I can, for example, here add my bevel radius with the cube. We obviously also have to align X, Y, Z. We have the tessellation. The tessellation is later for if we are using shaders to deform some geometry, then we need some more tessellation, not just one, right? And we have a lot of other things to change. But through all these other properties, we will go in later tutorials. Okay. So we have our cube here now, and basically that's for now. That should be enough for you to understand how to create geometries, basic geometries in Ventuz. So next thing what we do, I will show you how we can load an image. Yeah, because sometimes, and also in this tutorial, we will use a kind of a backdrop image, and based on that backdrop image, we will then create our own scene, right? So let's start with a rectangle, and on that rectangle, we want to put some image, right? So first, I will make the size of that rectangle bigger. Something like that, or let's make it whatever, 20 by 20. Next step, I need to load a geometry, right? Excuse me. So now I have to load the X texture. So I find the texture node here under my texture tab in the toolbox, or I just can simply press here space and type texture, and then I drag and drop my texture inside here. Now we have already the default texture loaded on our geometry, okay? So this is this checker, black and white checkerboard texture. Now let's jump into the properties of our material. So basically a texture, this material node is a very powerful node. Yeah, this material node you will use to create wireframe renders, you will use to load textures, you will use to load movies, you will use to load SDI. So basically any content you want to bring into Ventuz and put it onto a geometry, for any of that content you will use that material node. So that's why I said this is a pretty powerful node with a lot of functionality, with a lot of buttons and little complex things. So don't get scared from it. You will get your head around it, and sooner or later. Okay, so we have now a default texture loaded. So what I want to do, I want to load my own texture. So easy way to do, I select my material node, or my texture node in that case, and I will double click here on this material, right? This is already my default material. And then Ventuz brings me to the file explorer, where I then can choose all over my computer whatever I want to have. If I'm not in the Ventuz project, because by default this loader will always bring you directly into the Ventuz default project folder, right? What I showed you in the second part of this tutorial series, in your Ventuz project. So let's click this button project, and then the texture loader, or here our file explorer, will jump directly into the images folder of our Ventuz project. So if I go back here, then we can see this is our Ventuz project, so Ventuz Quick Start, and inside here we have then all the folders which Ventuz created when I created this project, right? So, and in that case I have already that image loaded, so I click to the images folder, I select the image, whatever I want, and I open it. Now, one thing to remember, images having a resolution, right? And we have actually tell Ventuz or our geometry, what resolution our image has. Yeah? So now we remember this is 1280 by 720, so this is basically a 60 by 9 aspect ratio, right? So I open this picture, and now we immediately can see, we see the picture, yes, but it's stretched, right, or more compressed, because the size of our rectangle is 20 by 20. So to change that, we know now we have a 60 by 9 aspect ratio. That's what we need. Then I can do it in many different ways. So I just can say, okay, 60 by 9 means the size X should be 16 and the size Y should be 9, right? And now we see immediately we have the right aspect ratio of our image. Now let's add another axis, actually the first axis here in front of our whole construct. And let's switch that back to inputs, that you can see here everything. And I just scale that picture more up. So what we also see now, this picture is actually affected by light, okay? So if I rotate, right, then you can see we have that blending effect. And I mean, that's actually what we want sometimes, not always, but sometimes we want that. If we are working with nice 3D models and with a nice environment, with a lot of lights, yeah, a lot of bump maps, whatever, then of course we want to have this light effect. So what's happening here? By default, in a default scene in Ventuz, if you don't have put in your own camera or your own light, of course Ventuz will have already the standard camera and a standard light. And as you can see here, the standard light is now roughly, yeah, left on the left top of the camera, right? So somewhere here is the default light. So sometimes, especially in this tutorial, I don't want to play with the light because I really want to have the real color of this image. Yeah, that's what I want to have, because this image will be my backdrop image, and I will later on start to build parts of this inner circle in Ventuz, right? So what I do now, I have a couple of different options, but the best option, I clearly want to turn off the light, or I don't want to turn off the light, but I want to tell this material, you are not affected by light. Okay, so let's go to the material, and on the material we have here our option. We have here different tabs. Yeah, so this is our standard tab where you can assign materials like images, movies, textures, and so on. Later on, much more down here. We have our shadow options. We have here our drawing options. For example, this is what we need later. I can now it's at solid. That's what I want, because I want to have a solid geometry with a texture of my image, right? But later on I want to have it as a wireframe, or I want to have it as a line, right? And always that different drawing options, you can then later on create very nice effects, or you can create your own scenes then basically. Then we have the blending, which we also will use in later tutorials, and we have here the set testing. So you can see this material is pretty complex node, but it's a very important one, and if you get your head around, it's not that complicated. Again, don't get scared. I try to go slowly and through everything, but at the same time I also want to try to bring you quickly to speed. Okay, back to our standard, right? So what we have now, the drawing mode is wrong, right? So we have to go here to our drawing mode and we bring it back to solid, and here we go. I want to turn off that light, actually not turning off the light. I want the material is not affected by light. So I go under the standard tab, and under the lightning model, it's now inherit, but I go here now to no light, and immediately we can see now we have the real color of this image. Okay, so let's make this guy a bit bigger like this. Before I go on and start to develop here, or to redevelop or build parts of this graphic in Ventuz, before I do that, I have to show you another important thing for Ventuz, because you need to know that from the very beginning, that you really know how you will build your scene. So Ventuz is always rendering from left to right and from top to bottom, right? And of course, Ventuz also is a 3D tool. That means if I bring now my picture more to the back, right? So I move it by positive into the positive Z axis, right? So far away from me. That means this picture will go into the background, right? And here I have to show you something. So let's, for this, quickly open a new scene. And let's say we create an axis and a rectangle, and we put a color in front, just a solid color. So as you can see, that solid color is also a material, just with a different preset. With the preset what we did before with our material, right? So it's just set by default to no light. Normally this is the default material, but if we choose here under color material, if we use this color, this will have exactly this setup. If we use the color solid, it will be exactly the same node, but the solid color node will have actually this no light preset already. So that's the difference between it. Okay, let's scale that up and let's give that a red color. So this is now my red rectangle, and I move that a bit to the left. And now I copy this. Copy and paste, you simply can select everything what you want to copy. So in this case, this is also a little trick you need to know. If you select this axis, you can see actually just this axis has this orange frame, but if you look closely, you also can see everything behind is slightly highlighted, right? So that actually means I selected now that whole path. So everything right side and also below, if I have later on, let's say I have here another axis below here, and I select this, everything behind this axis will be highlighted. If this axis is here and I select this one, then this one is not highlighted, okay? So this is very important to know. Sometimes, for certain reasons, you just want to select one simple node. To do that, you have to select first the node you want to, and after that press and hold Control and click on that specific node again. And now you can see that other highlight disappears and just our node is now selected, right? So if I would copy this now, and I can copy easily something if I just press and hold Control and then click the left mouse button and copy and drag it down, and then I have a copy of all the selected guys. So you see now I just made a copy of this axis, but actually I want to make a copy of that whole tree. So I select it once, press and hold Control and drag it down, and now I have a copy, a real copy of this red rectangle. So let's move that to the right side and let's give it a different color. So we call that now blue. Okay, perfect. Now let's move it a little bit more above each other. So now you can see, as I said, Ventuz is always rendering from top to bottom and from left to right. So now we can see our blue one is in the foreground, right? If I move this one down now, then our red one is in the foreground, because both of our, let's call that blue, and let's call that red. So as you can see, the blue one has exactly the same set position in the 3D world as our red one. So the red and the blue have exactly the same set position, right? So let's do something now. What I will do now, I will bring now some alpha channel into my red one. So I can do that if I select the color, and then under base color we have here the opacity. So let's bring that down, don't know, somewhere to 50, 40, 30, something like that. So now we can see through our red rectangle through, and we see the blue one, right? Okay. So what will happen if I bring now the blue one in front of? Now we can see we still have here we still have opacity here. We can see through our red one, through our red one, but the red one don't know anything at this point about the blue one, because like I said, the last guy who is rendered is the blue one. So when the blue one is rendered, the red one at that point did not know about the blue one, right? So this is something very important you need to know. So to make that a little bit more clear, so my red one should be always in front of the blue one, right? So what I do, I bring that now in front, and let me put another axis in front of that guy, and let's rotate that like this or like that. And here you really can see, so the red one is physically now in front of the blue one, right? So because we moved the Z axis down here. So let's see what happens if I bring now the red one behind the blue one, right? So it's exactly the same like we had before. The transparency did not affect the blue one, right? So because this transparent channel, this 34% opacity from our red material at this point did not know about the blue one. So you really have to be very carefully with that in the future. So everything what is in the background, what is in your physical scene, what is really in the background should be on top of your hierarchy. And everything what is in the very front should be on the bottom of your hierarchy. Sometimes it's tricky, sometimes it's not really possible, but later more about this. Okay, so remember that, we will need that later on. This is a very, very important thing. So let's go back to our first scene. We don't save the second one, and here we go. So what I will do now, I will try to, actually not try, I will show you how I would build graphics like that, okay? So to do that, what I will do first, I will turn off here or close my toolbox, because every node I use, I will press the space and then you can see the node here. And we actually will just use a couple of nodes, so it will be the axis, some circles, some materials, and if I introduce a new node, I will explain you and tell you that. I hope I don't forget. Okay guys, what we do first, we will start with another axis, and I use a circle and I put that circle here. So let's close that toolbox, because now we can see here our render window better, and now we have here the circle in the center. So what I also will do now, this is the backdrop is now too bright, because you know I want to focus more on the work what I do. So let's call this guy background, and let's bring down the opacity. Yeah? The opacity, like we had before, we go here to our material, then we go to our light, and we bring down the opacity, right? So something like that should be more than enough. And now we can see already much more clearly our geometry, what we build. So we can focus more on our work now. So because the backdrop I just need as a kind of a little lead, as a little template, you know, where I know, okay, come on, a little red guide where I want to build my stuff. Okay, I have my inner circle now. Let's build another circle, scale that up, something like that. And now let's go to the circle and give it a hole. So as you can see, here are already the properties from our circle. And let's open up that angle, something like that. Okay, let's copy that guy again and scale it up and maybe rotate it somewhere here. Yeah, let's copy that again and let's scale it up and let's bring it somewhere here, and let's close that angle a bit more here. Yes, and then we take another one, we scale it up, something like that. Let's make it a bit slimmer with the hole, right? So to make that outline slimmer, we have to increase the size of the hole. Okay, so now let's group that together. That's something what I like, because else, you know, you get quickly here a long hierarchy. So the way I do that, I use axis. Mostly I use axis, the axis node, and then I drag and drop everything in front of that axis. And let's call that inner circles, right? Because what I can do now with that group, if I select it and I make a right click, then he collapses it together. So I have now a bit more space, and I know already, yeah, I gave it a name already, and I know already, okay, this is now my inner circles. Also, a quick tip, with Control B, if you press Control B, then you will block the selected part of your scene, of your hierarchy, right? You also can do that over here. This is something what I use pretty often to quickly navigate in the Ventuz scene, you know, to see, hey, which one was now which circle, right? And I just select, okay, so okay, this is that one, or this is that one, right? Or this is that one. So this is a pretty handy, quick way, what I use since many years to figure out, to navigate where you are in the scene, right? Okay, let's go on with the next one. Let's just build another simple circle, and let's use a circle and scale it up somewhere here. okay, and give it a hole, and here we go. So colors and materials we will do later together, because I think this technique is pretty clear now. So in the next step I will build these little guys for you. Okay, I will show you how I would do that. That's already a little bit more complex and interesting. So let's give this guy a name. Let's call it mid circle, and let's right click it that we have more space here. Let's use another axis, and with that axis we are building one of that guys. So easy way, a circle. So let's scale that circle up, bring it roughly to the outline, right, and give it a hole, and that hole is then our inner line, and bring the angle down, right, and here we have now already one of our parts what we want to have. If you want to copy this, for example, right, you just copy that and move this over the axis then wherever you want to have it. Maybe sometimes you just want to have 3, 5, 10, but if you have if you really need to create unique parts, like if we say, if the client say, hey, I want to have that all these guys, I can change the text inside, then you probably have to do this manually, and you have to build each of these little blocks one by one. I know now we don't do that here. We do, there are clever ways to do, but I will show you a way now how we can quickly copy these guys here around, okay? So this is a new node, and that node we call the spread node. So just go to your toolbox and then you will find the spread node, okay? So let's use that spread node and put it here in front of that one guy what I created. Then the spread node will ask you, hey, do you want to create a continue output? In this case we say no. So now I have my spread node, and what this spread node will do, he will copy everything behind him as many times as I want. As you can see here in the properties, the spreader has a position, a rotation, a scaling factor, and so on. And down here you have the count max and the count, right? So if I move this guy now in the X position, if I change the value of the X position in the spreader, then I have two guys. If I increase the count, so this is actually how this spreader works, right? So if I bring it up to the Y, then he will do it like that. If I bring it to the front, he will do it like that. But what I want to do, I want to rotate it over the Z axis, and I already know exactly how many degrees we have. We have 15 degrees because these are 24 guys. So let's set up the max to 24, and let's set up the count to 24, and here we go. If we bring this value down now, right, now we have already quickly, with one node, we created quickly a lot of geometry, basically. So next step, what I want to do, I want to create this little outline. Let me show you that. So you can see this one here is a little outline, and there it's also a fill. So let's do that. So to do that, I will show it you with the spreader turned off. To turn off some functionality of some nodes, if you block it, everything behind is blocked, okay? So it's grayed out, it's really not rendered anymore. But sometimes, like now, I want that I just see this one kind of rectangle, right? Yeah, I want to focus on that, so I actually want to turn off the spreader. So I select the spreader, and down here we have the blocked state and we have the inactive state, right? And that inactive state means, you are not blocked, you keep everything behind alive, but, so basically render everything, but without my functionality, right? So this is basically what the active or inactive state means. Okay, so let's do that. So what I want to do, I want to create just that outline, right? So the circle, yes, has a hole, but the hole is already here inside. So what we can do here, we have now already a geometry built out of a geometry, right? So I use a material node, and I put it here in front. And you remember before I showed you here that drawing mode, right? So we go here to draw mode, and under draw mode, we are using either wireframe or we are using the lines. I actually using now the lines, because with the lines I can have a little bit more control about what Ventuz should render, right? So in that case, he shows all, but I can say just show the rim, or in that case, I will say show all, but remove the flat tessellation. Yeah, so he takes off that polygon lines in the center. So this is number one, and now I can change the width of our lines a little bit, and now we have already our outline, right? So next thing what I have to do, because with this one I lost now my fill actually, so only thing I have to do, I just copy this one above, because this should be my fill, and remember we said this the outline should be above, right? So the fill is behind, and after the fill we want to have that little white frame. So let's use another material or a color, but I try to use from now materials, because then we go more and more through that setups. And this material, I will change the color. I don't want to be affected by light, so I say no light. I open that and I say, okay, you guy are now, you should be something like orange-ish style, orange or something like that. Okay, and now we can see, now we have here our nice outline, right? I mean, this render window is now pretty small. I suggest also, if you have two screens with Ventuz, then bring your render window onto a second screen, yeah, because then you really can, then you really have, yeah, it makes much more fun. It's much more flexible to work, and you can see, you probably also can work then in the full resolution, right? Anyway, for now we bring that back down here. Okay, so let's quickly change a little bit the width here, something like that. Yes, that's okay. Okay, and now we are done. Now we bring back, we bring back, yeah, inactivate actually our spreader, and now we are already here at that point. So before we go on, let me build maybe 2-3 more quick things. So let's try to, let's say I want to build these 3 lines here, right? So let's use axis, let's use a circle, and do the things over and over again. Let's use that, give it all, righty, and open the angle somewhere to here. Okay, copy that, scale it up, give it a bit more of the angle value, copy it again, scale it up, and also here a little bit more of that angle. Okay, that's good. So let's bring that together in a group. Bring it here, 1, 2, 3. We call that 3 lines, and we also call that guys here 24 elements or something like that. Comments are very important, because later on you can imagine if you just have axis many, you don't know which one is which one. So try to remember from the very beginning, or to teach yourself to make very clear comments. Okay, so we have now 3 lines. I want to copy that one more time. Yeah, let's do that like this. Whoop. And I want to rotate that down here. Let's call it 180. Here we go. Because what I want to do now, I want to start to animate, to bring a little bit movement into that whole stuff. Yeah? And with this, I will introduce a new node for this tutorial, and that's our mover node. So let's go. The mover node is a logic node actually, or a content node. Yeah? So the mover, you never can drag and drop here into the hierarchy. A mover, it's a logic, like a script, or like other expressions, and yeah, many things you will learn later on in later tutorials. The mover is a content node. So let's search for the mover. So I type in mover. You also can find that in your toolbox under the animation tab. So here is our mover. So we drag and drop that mover inside here. What this mover is doing, this is now the first node actually with outputs, or actually we have already used nodes before with outputs, but this is the first node where I will explain, where it's very important that you understand the outputs, right? So our inputs have here now some methods to nudge, to reset, a function, a swing, a minimum, a maximum, and a duration, and a different mode and some offsets. We also have the outputs, and the outputs you can see we have already something moving, right? So this mover is doing something. He's actually moving. He's moving between values. That's actually what he's doing. With the properties, I like this output, top and bottom, right? I tell you, I think before already. So what this mover is doing, this mover is running now from -1 to +1. So the mover is running from minimum to maximum and back. This back means with the swing. So let me show you that. So let's do our first binding. A binding in Ventuz is a second important technique, right? So a binding is actually or what we want to do, I want that this value controls this value, right? So this mover should control the set rotation of these guys. That's actually what I want to do, right? So let's do that. To make it, yeah, I think that's okay. So to do that, I have to drag and drop inputs over outputs. This is important, okay? So my input is my set rotation, and I want to get a value, the output value from my mover. Okay, so I just drag and drop over here. Let's delete that. Let's do that again. So I go here to whatever value I want. Let's use the position now, and I left click and drag and drop it on my mover, because I want to get this binded to here. I want to have this input binded to this output. And this is at the beginning a bit confusing in Ventuz, but always remember input over outputs, okay? Inputs over outputs. This is very important to remember. So what's happening here now? Here's exactly happening like expected. This axis is now moved from -1 to +1 and back, and this one always in a loop. So now let's adjust here a little bit the values. Let's say I put this to -7 and I put this to 10 or 12, and now exactly that one is happened, right? So I can increase the time now. Now it will need 60.8 seconds to run from -7.2 to 11.4 and back, right? So, but actually in this case I don't want to control the position. In this case I actually want to control the rotation, right? So I want to have some nice movement with this set rotation. So let's move the set rotation to my mover, and let's try to set up something. Let's say -90 to maybe 90. And we make it in 5 seconds. And now you can see, now that guy is running, or this axis is actually rotating from -90 to +90 and back, and all of that is happening in 5 seconds. If I want to have an infinite rotation of something, then I just type here 0 to 360, and I turn off the swing. And now this guy is rotating endlessly counterclockwise from 0 to 360, right? If I want to turn it around, that he is turning clockwise, I just swap these values 360 to 0, right? And let's make it a bit more quick. This is a simple animation. So obviously you can use now more of this, let's call it quickly outer lines. You can use now more of these movers, right? To create more movement of these lines or whatever you want to do, right? So with the mover you really are able to control any value. So let's say this is the mid-circle we don't want, but let's say what we have here, maybe I want also this guy a little bit animated, right? So let's create another mover and drag and drop, do our second binding, drag and drop inputs over outputs, okay? And set them up, let's say 180 to -180, something like that. And maybe just doing that in 5 seconds. Just play around with all that values, yeah, and with all that properties, because there are so many and it's nearly impossible to explain all of them. And another thing what I like here, I like that sine function, right? So this sine function is now running a little bit in a sinus curve, a little bit more bumpy and a little bit more bouncy, right? So just play around with that, guys. And of course now you can also go on and you can add colors, whatever you want, right? So just use a color or use a material like we talked before. They are mostly all the same. Let's put a color here, and let's say no light, and I want to have it reddish or bluish or whatever. Exactly. So this is basically it. I think this covers most of the things what I wanted to cover in this part 3, because with these things you are now already able to create your own little things, your own little user interfaces. Yeah, you have the geometries, you know how to use the properties. Just do it. You know how to add colors, you know how to set up different drawing modes like wireframes and stuff like that. Of course, you also can use that with 3D objects, right? Like a cube. Let's say, for example, I want to have some magic cube or something inside my circle, right? Let's do that. Let's create an axis here, and let's create a cube. And this cube, we want to have a bit bigger. And then let's say this cube should have a material, because I want to change the drawing mode, right? So I need a material in front. I go here to the drawing mode and I call this UVET rendered wireframe now, right? So now let's rotate it somehow. So now we can see already, okay, we can see it, but we see there's something going on, right? And actually what is going on? I mean, it's, let me explain that quickly. What is going on here? So we have here our backdrop. So let's block the backdrop. Once I block the backdrop, we actually can see the whole cube, right? But the backdrop is now cutting together with my cube here, right? So I will use this to explain you the layer system, because the layer system is also pretty simple, and I think this would be the last thing for this part 3 of this tutorial. And then you should have enough to play around and to create some new scenes. Maybe you can put some screenshots below in the comments, whatever you like, until we see us then in the next tutorial. Okay guys, let's do that quickly with the cube. So I want to have that cube is rotating somewhere in the middle. So let's turn off my background first, and let's change the wireframe we have. The wireframe seems to be okay, but we are also affected by light, right? So I change also this cube now. I change I change the base color to no light, right? Perfectly, and now we can see it. Now let's try quickly something. Let's exchange the cube with a sphere. I think a sphere fits a bit more nice inside there. Yes, I think so. Let's increase this sphere somehow. Yeah, that's okay, somewhere here. And let's bring back here the rotation. And now let's see what would be nice. Maybe something like that, right? So we just put a mover here. And we rotate this sphere nicely from 360 to 0 in an infinite manner, and slowly, and 10 or so, maybe 20. Yes, that's okay. I think that's nice. Maybe we can adjust the color, or maybe not. It doesn't matter. You can do however you like. Something like that. Whatever. Okay. So this is our inner sphere. We are going soon to the layers. One thing what I will show you here now, quickly done. We put an axis in front, all in front of here. This one on top. Okay, so let's call this our root, is our very root node, and this is wrong. We also want to have this guy here. So let's unblock that. So if I rotate now this guy, we can see something is happening. Something weird is happening. So first thing, our sphere is cutting through our backdrop, right? And also here we have some artifacts, right? And this is happening because we are moving now in the 3D world, things around, and all that guys are exactly on the same set position, right? That's why we have exactly these artifacts. There are a couple of options to avoid them. There is a node where you just can put right in front, but I actually want to show you a better way, and a way you will probably use much more often in the future. The right way will be, like I tell you before, everything what is in the real world more behind should be more behind, okay? So, and then also from top to bottom. That means first thing what I would do, I can start from the background and move the background back, or I can bring other things more into the front, right? So let's do it from the background. So I move the background back, right? So I move the background somewhere here. Sometimes it's really just a little value you have to move, and then things are already solved, right? Like this now. So I just really moved my background now, even 0.0001, really just a tiny bit. Sometimes you have to try it. You see this is not enough, so let's move it back 0.0001. We had the same before, right? Let's see, no, still a bit, let's bring it a bit more back. Okay, I think that's good. That should work now. So really just a tiny bit, right? And then you have here your nice 3D menu. For example, even I think even with that backdrop, it looks pretty cool already, right? Okay, guys, layers. Layers we will probably use soon from the next tutorial, guys. So the layers working same like a Photoshop layer basically, right? So I would do this setup basically differently, yeah. So let's go to a new scene, right? And by default we always have a 3D layer. In the 3D layer we can build our 3D scenes exactly like here. If we want to add some layer, then we just click that plus here, and then we can say, hey, I want to have a 2D layer, okay? Or a 3D layer, or a HDR 3D layer, or a scene layer. In scene layers you can load existing Ventuz scenes, right? So that means you can load scenes into a Ventuz scene, so you have then nested scenes. So this is pretty powerful with this Ventuz tool to create very cool, complex, nice scenes, right? So what I want to do now, just to show you, I want to create a 3D layer, sorry. I actually have one already, so we have, let's call it layer red, and we call another one layer blue. Okay, so in my layer red I just quickly create a cube, and I actually create a red cube, so a material. So let's use this material, and let's give this, we keep light here on, but we make it red and make it bigger and rotate it somewhere around the world, that we have that 3D-ish effect. Maybe a little bevel, okay, why not? So actually I delete this layer and I copy that layer just with Control C, Control V, and I call it layer blue, because now I have in this blue layer already my red cube. It's copy, right? It's a copy, and I just have to change my color here to blue. Boom. And now I have two cubes. But what I want to do, I want to move the blue one to the left, and I also want to move the blue one. Now let's bring that guy to the front, right? So now you can see now everything is fine. The blue one is here. -12 means it's coming into the front. He is now really in front of that cube. That's all good, right? So what's happening if I change now this structure, right? Now even my blue cube is really in front, much more in front. It's -50 units more in front than the red one here, right? But the blue one will never be able to be in front of the red one, right? So this is also this hierarchy. So same here, like I say, the same rule what is applying here in the hierarchy. Everything is what is very in behind, what is in background, should be on top of the scene, and the same rule will apply here in the layers, right? So for example, another new scene, just to give you some idea, let's say you have a background layer. This will be on the very top. After that you will have something like a content 3D scene layer somewhere in the middle, right? But always in front of the background. And you will have a user interface, right? Interface. And that user interface is always in front of the background, and of course always in front of the 3D scene, right? So this would then be probably your layer setup, how you will work, right? So you will work in your background scene, you will work in your content as 3D scene, and here you will build basically your user interface. This is basically how the layers work. So pretty simple. And yes, guys, I think for now that's already enough and a lot. So use the time, get your head around, try to build your own scenes, make your bindings with the mover, make something like this or something more beautiful, build something, take your time, work with geometries, put textures, play with lights, play with the other content, right? And until then, see you in the next part, where we probably will go into much more logical development, where we will then build buttons, right, to make this whole guy, to build a user interface. Basically, that's my plan, right? That we say, okay, this is now our first kind of style, and later on we will build buttons here around, and when we press certain buttons, then the button will have some visual effects, and we will trigger some content, maybe some movies starting to play, some 3D model imports and stuff like that. So see you soon. If you like this, please subscribe to the channel, and see you very soon again. Until then, bye bye.